Nothing going on. Have you logged in? Checking. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning show, Elevenses. Oh, we've got the music going again. Hang on a minute while I sort that out. Right, let's stop the music. So, okay, where was I? Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's well. It's the Sunday morning version of Elevenses, the live show that's going out from Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills. And I'm broadcasting this Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. So the next show will be tomorrow. What have we got to talk about today? I'm actually nursing a little bit of a hangover this morning, I have to be honest. I wouldn't normally be doing anything motorcycle orientated with a little bit of a aftermath of the night before, but we had a conference cocktail party last night. I'm sure an awful lot of people are doing that. I was catching up with friends in New York and in Oxford and also on the Isle of Wight, so it was a busy evening, and I ended up rounding the evening off by making a call to my brother in New York. He's actually just up the coast a little bit, but he's actually out there on the east coast at the moment, and just catching up with him. So it was a bit of a late night to bed, and I'm just a little bit under the weather this morning. So anyway, hopefully on with the stories today. What have we got to talk about? Well, first of all, I want to talk about the MCIA's call for action on the end of life issue. I'll come on to explain what that is in just a moment. A electric bike manufacturer called SuperSoaker is offering 10% off their machines for key workers. Third story I've got is that an interesting one from New Zealand, actually, about a buyer who bought what he thought was a virtually new bike, and it turned out to be 2 years old. And the comeback he had, and it's just some words of warning from me about buying motorcycles of that nature. And then final story, stay tuned for this one. I'll be looking at staying biking fit. And the first thing I'll be looking at is actually keeping wrist strength up. So we'll come back to that right at the end of the show. Okay, don't forget, if you've got anything to say on the show, do drop me a line. I will read everything you post. I won't be able to do it, unfortunately, until the end of the show because I can't do two things at once. But use the comment box and I'll get back to you when I go off air. Anyway, same again, if you've got any suggestions for the show, any comments, feedback, I'm always happy to hear that. And if I can fit something in for someone, I will at a later date. So, okay. Don't forget, of course, you can also catch up with the show on here on Facebook, or you can find it on my YouTube channel, which I'm starting to put some material onto. Okay, so all right, on to the first story. I mentioned the end of life issue. Now, this is an indication that the world hasn't completely stopped for coronavirus, but life does go on. And the motorcycle industry here says that the bike industry itself is facing a crisis. Motorcycle Industry Association, that is, I should say. What's the problem is, it's not so much the shutdown in sales, although of course that will affect dealers and anybody basically like myself whose income revolves around motorcycling. We're all going to be affected by that, but this is something rather different. It's called the powered two-wheeler end of series regulations. I'm hearing people already shaking their heads and wondering what that is and what it's got to do with them. Well, it's all to do with the ever tightening emission regulations. The next set of regs, so-called Euro 5 regulations, are due to come into force on the 1st of January 2021. And after that date, all new bikes registered in the EU must comply, except for one thing, and that's where the so-called end of series provisions apply. Now, what this allows the industry to do is clear a backlog of a limited number of Euro 4 stock, the previous emissions regulations standard. So the EU members states are actually free to set up their own end of series details, and as we're still in the transition post-Brexit period right now, they still apply, and I'd guess that EU regs on emissions will continue to apply after we've left the EU, simply to make sure that everything is on a level playing field. You know, basically it would allow UK manufactured vehicles to be sold in the EU. So I can't see that there will be a difference in standards post-Brexit. So anyway, leaving Brexit aside, this matters very much to the motorcycle industry because unlike cars, which tend to be built on a just-in-time basis, in other words, you order a new car and it's delivered several weeks later, having been put together for you. Bikes tend to be built rather differently. They tend to be built in batches. The manufacturers actually produce a number of motorcycles which they believe will meet the following season's demand, and then those are shipped to the markets. So come sort of this time of year, there will be a number of bikes in the sort of dealers and in the sort of shipping chain, as it were, ready to sell on through the year. Now, of course, what's going to happen is that the sales are plummeting. They've almost hit rock bottom, almost at a standstill, and we're going to have a huge backlog of motorcycles that were built for this year's emission standards actually going on sale, hopefully, when the pandemic is cleared. They'll be there in the dealers still to be sold. Now, That's the end of series legislation. The trouble is, how many vehicles are going to be allowed to sell? What it could, in theory, happen is that an awful lot of these bikes will simply be illegal to sell on the European market. Um, so um, this sort of transition has happened before. It happened between Euro 3 and Euro 4, and you may remember sort of what happened was there was a number of bikes still available with the previous standard available to sell in the following year, but it's a strictly limited number. The MCIA's concern here is that at the moment, the government haven't announced any such Euro 4 to Euro 5 transition. We're still waiting on that arrangement to be sorted out. Um, it was apparently under discussion and then put on hold because of the general election. It's still on hold, presumably because initially the Brexit deal was going to be thrashed out, and it's probably stalled completely now because of the coronavirus crisis. So there's no action in government, not surprisingly, to deal with this issue. Um, so we're going to have a big stack of unsold bikes, and at the moment there's a, no clarity about how they could be sold through. What the MCIA are proposing is to move the whole thing back a year, so that the end of series can go on for another extra 12 months, and then bikes can actually be registered with Euro 4 emissions into 2022. And the European motorcycle industry body, which is called the ACEM, ACEM, has also made a similar request to the EU. So this isn't just a UK thing, this is actually a Euro-wide problem. Now, none of this would actually delay the introduction of Euro 5. These bikes would still come into the system as of now. They're probably already on the market, and they will continue to sell through 2021. But what it just allows is for that old stock to have an extra 12 months to clear out. News for us? Well, what it could mean is once we're out the other side of this, it could mean some bargains bikes in the showrooms. So that's something to keep an eye open for. But word of warning, watch out for emissions limits on things like the London ultra low emission zone. It's undoubtedly going to be a factor that the limits will be ramped up as older vehicles start to fall below standards. So watch out. You could end up buying a bike which doesn't actually meet your emission zone. So do check that and I think bear that in mind. Right. Okay. So where are we now? Just a reminder that you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills. Still to come, we're going to have a quick look at keeping biking fit right at the end of the show. I've got a story on a motorcycle which was sold as nearly new. It turned out not to be. And the next story that we're going to have is all about SuperSoaker. Right. You're asking who's SuperSoaker, aren't you? Because I read this story and that was my response too. I had never heard of them, but it turns out that they are an electric motorcycle manufacturer, and they actually market a range of electric motorcycles and scooter-styled bikes across the UK. Now, having had a quick look at the bikes, they're short-range commuters. They are unashamedly aimed at people doing small distances backwards and forwards to work. But they also come at quite an attractive price point for an electric bike. Now, they have a sort of a 125 equivalent called the TC Max. It's a sort of roadster style, and it's capable of 60 miles per hour. And they claim that the maximum range for the bike is about 60 miles. Not flat out, but if you are using the bike a bit more gently, you could get about 60 miles out of it. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but as I said, these aren't aimed at people who are hacking up and down the M1 to get to work. They're aimed at people who have a short distance to travel backwards and forwards across the city. And they're priced, those bikes are priced at 149. So I was looking at his notes. Now that's a pretty good price. That's not dissimilar to the cost of a 125. Quite frankly, a standard 125. Okay, the 125 is probably quicker. It will go a lot further on a tank of fuel, and you can top it up, and all the other objections to electric motorcycles. But if you are travelling 5 or 6 miles across a city to work, then why go for the petrol-driven machine? Because these things are costing about a penny a mile to run. So have a think about that in terms of a gallon of fuel. That's a very, very cheap price. Now, they also do a moped equivalent, and these, again, go a little bit further, maybe about 70 miles on a fill-up, but they are restricted to 28 miles per hour. So you can ride these things on a CBT. No emission charges, penny a mile. I can see why these bikes are being touted out to commuters. Okay, so the other interesting thing about these bikes is that each of the SuperSoaker machines uses rechargeable batteries, obviously, but unlike most of the electric bikes that I've seen to date, like the Zeros that I test rode last spring, and which I'll repeat, I'll come back to those on another show, I think. These battery packs are actually removable, so they have a carry handle, and you can lift the battery pack out of the bike, and then you can carry it to wherever you want. Now, obviously, if you happen to have no garage parking, or you don't park your motorcycle right next to the house, so you can't run a lead out the window or whatever, that could be very useful indeed. You can carry that battery inside and plug it into a normal 3-pin plug. It also means, of course, you've got the opportunity to take the battery out when you're at work and plug it in to a standard socket. So again, you can kind of work your way a little bit around that range issue if you can charge it at your place of work. I think that's a great idea. And here's the real deal. If you're a key worker, then you may be able to take advantage of a 10% discount on these bikes, which is what SuperSoaker are offering at the moment. They claim to have made numerous sales to doctors and other key workers over the last few weeks. So that might be something you might want to look at. The less powerful bikes, as I said, the sort of moped equivalents, can be ridden without a CBT if you have a car license that dates back to before 2001. If you remember, there was a dispensation we're talking 20 years ago now, aren't we? There was a dispensation that allowed somebody with an existing car license to ride without a CBT, and that was ended as of 2001, but it still applies. So if you do happen to have a car license that's that old, you can actually ride one of these without a CBT. If you have a more recent car test pass, then you must do CBT first. Now, whether you're going to be able to get one or not isn't entirely clear. I've been following comments on a motorcycle instructors forum that I pop in on from time to time, and some schools are apparently still doing one-to-one CBTs, and for key workers only. But the situation is confused because other instructors have reported that they've been stopped by the police, told to desist immediately, return to base, stop what they're doing, and risk a fine if they're caught out again. They've been told they shouldn't be working. So that's my understanding, is that there is no clear guidance on whether or not you can get a CBT if you need one at the moment. It was something I referred to a few weeks ago. What if you need a renewal and you are a key worker? Well, I suggested that the answer to that is to do what they've done with MOTs and extend CBTs for 6 months automatically. But so far, there's no movement on that. That proposal has apparently been made elsewhere. Anyway, here we go. That's the thing with SuperSoaker. So, right, where are we now? We are just about to move into the fifth story. Just a reminder that you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. I'm here on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And just a reminder, I put my props where I can't reach them. You can order my paperback books online still. If you can't ride a bike, you might be able to read. There we go. Let's put them up into the camera view where you can actually see them. There's a couple of books here. Riding with the Devil, that sort of stories really about my biking background, and survival skills there. That's my encapsulated training course in a book. So if you want to actually learn a bit about biking while you're sat on your backside, have a read. You can still get those delivered by Lulu, my publisher. Okay, so where are we now then? So still, I've got the article on Biking Fit, but let's have a think about the third story now. Question I pose you is, how old's your new bike? Do you know? Well, you can ask. Obviously, you may not get the right answer. Now, this story comes from New Zealand, and hopefully it doesn't happen too often. But what happened was a buyer went to a dealer in Christchurch. I won't name them, but you should be able to find the story if you're really interested. And what happened was he bought what he thought was a virtually new machine and discovered it was actually a 2-year-old model. So here's what happened. The bike was a Triumph Street Twin, and it was described as a demonstrator. So the buyer, a chap called Philip Johnson, he got a bit of a discount, I assume, but it still set him back nearly 13,000 New Zealand dollars. That was in October 2019. Anyway, he did a bit of digging around and found that it wasn't what it was appearing to be. He took the case to the Motor Vehicle Disputes Tribunal, which they have over there in New Zealand, and told them that the dealership had actually misled him into thinking that the motorcycle was a current 2019 model when it was actually a 2017 bike. Johnson said he specifically asked the age of the motorcycle, and he was told that it was new. And if he said if he'd known it was 2 years old, he wouldn't have bought it. Now, at the hearing, the dealer sales manager said he couldn't recall the exact words he'd used, but he said he didn't believe that he told Mr. Johnson that the bike was a current model. So obviously it's one person's word against the other. However, the tribunal was apparently presented with 2 online listings, one of which had been seen by Mr. Johnson before he bought the bike, which described the Triumph Street Twin as a 2019 model and stated that it was a demonstrator. The second online advert, which he apparently was also found, said he found this after he bought the machine, described it as an ex-demo 2018 model. So obviously a bit of discrepancy there between the adverts and what the reality of the bike was. Triumph New Zealand were contacted, and they said that they got the bike in as stock in March 2017, and they sold it to the dealer in April 2018 at a discounted price. So by the time he bought it in 2019, it had already been at the dealers for well over a year. Okay, not entirely surprisingly, the tribunal actually ruled in Mr. Johnson's favour, and he received a full refund on this. Now, okay, my thoughts on this. There is an element of caveat emptor, buyer beware, in any actual information. Is a demonstrator a good buy? Well, it can be, but it should be sold as such, obviously. And I would be a little bit cautious about buying one. Why is that? Well, the first thing I'd say is any potential buyer should have a good look at a demonstrator and make sure that there's no crash damage on it. You can get a useful discount on a ex-demo model. People get very hefty savings on them, but they're demos. It's not unknown for people to crash bikes they're not familiar with. In fact, it's one of the high risk factors of riding motorcycles. If you're not familiar with a bike, it's you are liable to come off. It's more than a bike you're riding all the time. So, okay, sometimes that damage is likely to be very minor. I had a test ride booked a couple of years ago. I was going up to ride the new GSXR range, and I booked a ride on the 600 and the 750. And I phoned up just to confirm. I don't know why I phoned them up, but I did. Phoned them up, and I said, "Oh yes, we'd forgotten about you. Don't bother." And I asked why not, and they said, "Well, it's because somebody dropped the 600." And I said, "Well, okay, I'll just come up and ride the 750." And they said, "No, you can't ride the 750 either because they dropped the 600 onto the 750, and they knocked them both over." And they both broken their brake levers, and I gather various other bits like indicators had probably gone in the impact as well. And neither bike was capable of being ridden. They didn't have the spare parts in stock. So, watch out for that. Obviously, that's minor. That can be bolted back on. But, sometimes some quite serious damage can be patched up. Things like radiators can take a bit of a ding very easily in a crash. So do check a demonstrator very carefully indeed. Anything else that would concern me? Well, what's the first thing that a lot of people do with a demonstrator? Is how fast do it accelerate, Gov? These bikes come out of the factory. They have 0 miles. They're put in the dealers as a demo bike, and they often get full throttle nailed to the stop from the off. Now, modern motorcycles don't need anything like the running in that they used to. The old days of half revs to 500 miles, and then gradually increase it to 1,000 miles when it was considered running. You don't have to be quite as cautious as that, but I'd still like to ease the bike into its life. And if somebody's nailed it from sort of 5 miles out, I would. I don't know whether it will damage the engine particularly, but I'd just not be entirely happy about that. So, think about what you're buying with a demonstrator. You should be all right, but just be a little bit careful. If you're looking for a bargain, of course, then you'll sometimes find what are called pre-registered machines. Now, these are often sold at new pre-registered. Well, technically, if they're pre-registered, they're not new. They already have one owner. What happens is here that the manufacturer usually has a stock of unsold machines that they want to shift. They don't want to depress the price of the brand new bikes. So what they do is the dealer actually gets to register the motorcycle, and then they're sold at a discount to the dealer by the manufacturer. And that discount, some of it at least, gets passed on to the buyer. The problem is, as I said, you will be showing up as the second owner of the motorcycle on the registration document, and that can impact sales, resale value later when you come to try to pass the bike on yourself. The next person will be the third owner, and some people don't like being third owner of a motorcycle. You'll also have lost some of the manufacturer warranty, of course, which kicks in from the day that it was first registered. So you'll have to decide for yourself how likely your new bike is to develop faults along the way. But one thing they should be is 0 miles. They shouldn't have any miles on the clock. That discounted price, if you're not looking to trade the bike in anytime soon, then that can be very attractive indeed. All well and good. I actually still have a Hornet that I bought a long time ago now. It was pre-registered. It was 6 months old by the time I bought it. It had 0 miles on the clock, so in terms of running it, it was brand new. In terms of technically age, I was the second owner of a 6-month-old bike. I've got a really quite a significant saving over a new bike. So, and of course, being a Honda, nothing actually much has gone wrong with it in the time that I've owned it. So, okay, think about that. Just check what you're getting for a motorcycle when you order it, and then think about what you're doing. Right, okay, now I have a prop somewhere which I seem to have put down and lost. Where is it? Another prop. Let me just find it. There it is. On the floor. Right now, I mentioned we're going to talk a little bit about keeping fit. So this is a fun piece of the show, but don't forget you can join me on Elevenses here Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. So here is the gadget that I'm talking about. If like me, you're going to be locked in for the long haul here, um, particularly for those of us who no longer have the resilience of youth on our hands. It's not a bad idea to try to keep a little bit of biking fit. Years ago, when I was a motorcycle courier, I rode all year round, just barely had a few days off over Christmas. But having done that for far too many years, riding in awful weather wasn't a lot of fun. So when I became a motorcycle instructor, I made a conscious decision to park things up for January, and now I only do the post-test training. I'm actually usually fairly quiet from December through till February, depending on the weather. Um, Now that could be 3 months off the bike, and when I'm get back on it, one of the things I find is that the clutch always feels like it's gone heavy and stiff. Okay, if a bike's parked up, there is a risk that the clutch cable will corrode a little bit, but so I try to deal with that in a way that I'll talk about on another show. But the real problem is, of course, that the muscles in my forearm, which are the ones that I use all the time to pull the clutch in, um, have just lost a bit of strength. So, for the last few years, what I've been doing is actually doing a few exercises before I get back on the bike for a month or so to just build up a little bit of biking fitness. And what I found is it actually is surprisingly effective. And to try to keep these forearm muscles in shape, what I've been using is this wrist strengthener or something very similar. This is a fairly new gadget for me. Now, what you'll see is that it's got two big advantages. The first one is it actually feels like and shapes like a clutch to use. It actually is exactly the right action. It's not like squeezing those rubbery balls and things. This actually gives you the right action. And the second thing is that you notice the spring there. It also has a screw device on the top, which makes it from really light right up to if you turn it all the way to the end, which I won't do because it will take too long, you'll get a pull that a lever de Jota owner, remember those? Lever de Jota owner would appreciate. Um, the These are made by, or this one is made by somebody called Elite Sports with a Z, and you'll find identical products online. I can't find Elite Sports in the UK. But the thing is that it will keep my grip up over these months where we're sat indoors. Just literally sit and play with it a few times a day. 5 minutes of fiddling with that while you're on the telly, and it really does make a big difference. So they're not expensive. I think this one was about £12 or something. So, if you are sat indoors and you've got no riding to do, then that is one way of staying as fit as you can. All right, that's it for today. We've reached the end of the show. So I hope that you have enjoyed what you've been watching. The I'll be back with more news, views, and tips tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget you can check out my biking tips on Facebook. The one went up yesterday in my Skills on Saturday series. Have a look at that. There was earlier in the week, there was tips on Tuesday. Again, have a look at that. You'll find these videos are available online on Facebook, and I'll also put them up onto YouTube as well, and I'll be expanding my videos up on YouTube. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Hopefully catch you next time out, and don't forget, you've been watching Kevin Williams of Survival Skills. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance here today.